This incident happened to me when I was 17, and because of this, I will never take public transportation again. This is something I went through that no girl, or anyone for that matter, should ever go through. In 2016, I had just started my senior year in high school and had also received my driver's license. I didn't own a car yet, but I did have my dad's car that I would sometimes take to school or go to a friend's house. We had only one car at the time and knew when to use it wisely and when we had to. My dad would mostly need it for work or to go grocery shopping, and I would use it for my things. He would sometimes not need the car, but when he did need it, I'd have to take the bus to get to where I was going. This will be important in the story later. Anyway, I appreciated everything that my dad did. He'd basically take care of the whole family. Paying the mortgage, paying bills, buying food, paying for my school, and paying for medical bills for my mom, who was very sick. My mom suffered from stage 3 lung cancer and was diagnosed with it a few years back. We unfortunately caught it late, and she would be in the hospital back and forth as she occasionally would be coughing up blood. One day, my friends and I all made plans to hit up our local McDonald's for dinner. I know, not a good first choice as far as dinner, but it was normal for a group of teens to eat there no matter what. Besides, we've been craving McDonald's for a while now and never got the chance to due to school getting in the way of our free time. My dad dropped me off at the McDonald's and to let him know when I was ready so he could pick me up. We all went inside and sat down to eat. Just to be clear that our group wasn't all of the same gender. There were 6 of us, me, Vanessa, her boyfriend, Jake, Carlos, and Casey. I had been friends with them ever since freshman year and we loved hanging out together. We found a table and pretty much pigged out talking about school and how homework was too stressful for us. About an hour had passed and most of my friends had already left. It was just me and Jake. He was waiting for his sister to pick him up and I called my dad to tell him that I was ready to be picked up as well. However, my dad said that he couldn't pick me up as he got called into work for a few hours, which meant that I had to take the bus back. I stupidly forgot my bus pass, so Jake, being the nice friend he was, lended me a few dollars for the bus. I told him thanks and his sister then came to get him. After about 10 minutes of waiting for the bus, it had finally come and I immediately got on and put my earbuds in. That's when I noticed a man staring at me from the reflection of the window. I glanced at him and he was sitting down, shooting me a very menacing look. I paid zero attention to him and my instincts told me that he was probably just some creepy drug addict wanting attention or whatever. But I was dead wrong. A few minutes had passed and he kept staring me down. The more the bus came to stops, the more people got off, which made me wonder, what stop was he getting off at? I thought nothing of it and proceeded to try and not make any eye contact with him and mind my own business. My stop finally came and I got off in a bit of a hurry, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the man walking behind me. I walked a bit faster and when I turned back around, the man was nowhere in sight. In order to get to my house, you'd have to go across a little bridge above a canal that really gives you the creeps. As I'm walking across the bridge, I notice a light coming from under it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to know just what this light was. I mean, who wouldn't? I made my way over to it when all of a sudden, it turned off. I then thought to myself that maybe I didn't need to see what that light was, and was debating whether or not I should turn around. I stupidly made the wrong choice and walked over to the bridge with a sense of dread. As soon as I looked under the bridge, I screamed when I saw the same man in front of me. He then tackled me onto the ground, trying to put his hand over my mouth, preventing me from screaming. I tried to use all my strength to overpower him, or at least get him off of me, but I was 5'2" at the time, and this man looked to be about 6'4", so there was no way I could fight back even if I tried. I was constantly struggling to get him off me, but he was just too strong. Thankfully, I remembered that I had my house keys in my back pocket, and thank God they were still in there. I took them out and jabbed the key into his chest as hard as I could. He let go of me and screamed in pain. This was now my only opportunity to run to my house. I sprinted toward my house, not glancing back once, but I knew he was not far behind as I could hear rapidly pacing footsteps from behind me. Thankfully, I managed to outrun him with very little time to spare and made it to my neighborhood safely. I ran to my house to call the police and explain. They ended up coming to take my statement but left shortly after. 2 weeks later, I started to notice a suspicious white car slowly creeping around my neighborhood, but it only stayed about a week after. I still have no idea if that was him or just some coincidence. I never saw the man again, and I definitely won't be taking public transportation anymore. I used to work as an EMT about a year after I graduated from my university. For those of you who don't know what an EMT is or does, we're basically the entry-level patient care providers that respond to incoming calls about serious situations. Kind of like paramedics in a way. Anyway, we'd received incoming calls about urgent issues, most of them being extremely graphic. Wife gets killed during car accident, individuals' cars on fire, major car accidents, and stuff like that. However, this one particular call we responded to was the call that made me quit. We received a call saying that a family had been driving their car for a nice family road trip when the car smashes head-on into the back of a boat on top of its trailer. The father dies instantly along with one of the kids. The blades of the motor smash into the car, causing glass to break and severe injuries. One of the blades had cut through half of the wife's neck, causing a good amount of blood to spill everywhere over the interior. Needless to say, we arrived on scene, and when we saw what happened to the wife, we had the urge to throw up. It honestly looked like something out of a horror movie. At this point, we proceeded to remove the motor blade out from her throat to help reduce the loss of blood until we got her into the ambulance. The other kid had thankfully survived, and a relative came to pick him up. We got her into the ambulance and sped off while doing some tests on her, but she was losing more blood by the second. She couldn't even talk. She could only move her eyes and make some noises. We then discovered that she had cuts due to the glass shatter everywhere on her body, which only made her bleed out more. We tried to get a pulse, but after a while she stopped breathing and was pronounced dead on arrival. I cried knowing how the kid that survived must have felt when he found out the tragic news. I don't know how it is living without a mother or a father, but I'm sure it's heartbreaking. About a week after I had quit my job as an EMT, I took another path as a career that didn't lead to or involve the healthcare/paramedic industry. EMTs, paramedics, police officers, first responders, or firefighters work hard to try and ensure your safety. I'm telling you this story to spread awareness to show just how hard and disturbing our jobs can sometimes be. Before I begin, I want to apologize for the shortness of the story, as my parents didn't explain this in full detail, but I'll give you a recap of what supposedly happened. Back when my parents had gotten married, my dad wanted to take my mom up to a nice vacation on the beach that they would remember for the rest of their lives. A so-called honeymoon, you could say. My mom and dad had a very stable and healthy relationship at the time, and still do to this day. They had previously booked a room for their stay, and right away they started having these weird negative feelings, especially my mom. My mom says that she didn't know how to describe them, but she felt as if she were being watched by someone. My dad felt it as well, but it didn't really affect him as much as it did to my mom. The last night, my mom had sworn to me that she heard a laugh of a woman from somewhere in the room. They immediately left after that, and still don't have an explanation till this day. Back in my early 20s, I worked at my college being a student assistant for the campus library. The job was simple enough, but it was also very boring. Basically, you'd sit down on a chair making sure people would sign in and stock books back in their correct places if left lying around. The thing that made it extremely boring was the fact that you couldn't use your cell phone unless it was urgent, and you'd also have to put in a request. The only so-called fun thing to do was during your break. We had a really nice break room with cookies, cakes, and pretty much all the junk food you could eat. It was a chill job, you could say. One day, my manager assigned me to work the night shift as there would be a few employees out that day. I was not a fan of working the night shift, but I realized that it was more money in my pocket at the end of the week, so therefore I took it. I still had the same things to do, but the only thing I didn't normally do was to close the library, which would be closed around 10. Around 8 o'clock or so, my supervisor told me that I should wipe down the keyboards and mouses in the computer section of the library so it would be ready for the next day. At this point, the library was pretty much a ghost town, which I found relaxing. It would mostly be dead around 8 p.m. and you maybe have around 3 or 4 people come in after to check about a book or print an assignment. Anyway, as I'm cleaning the computer section, I noticed what looked like a flash drive sitting on a desk that a student or faculty member had accidentally forgot. Our policy states that if any student or staff member who happens to find someone else's personal belongings are to bring it to a supervisor so that they could report it into the lost and found. However, when it comes to stuff like this, I get really interested into seeing what was on it. I thought of it as finding out the truth of seeing what kind of person someone was. Therefore, I took it and immediately put it into my pocket, making sure nobody saw me. Call me whatever you want, I knew it wasn't my business, but hey, that's just how I was. Anyway, my shift ended at around 9:45 and I got in my car and drove to my house extremely eager to see what was on it. I would have expected it to just be some folders and some papers, but that wasn't the case. I got home and rushed into my room to turn on my computer. However, once I plugged in the drive, I noticed something strikingly odd about the name of it. It was titled as Personal Files. The title made me even more intrigued about what was on it, and that's when I made a very stupid decision. I opened the files and covered my mouth with both of my hands. There were at least 100 photos of child pornography, each of them listed under someone's name. I nearly threw up at the first sight of it and unplugged the flash drive immediately. I told my parents about it, and at first they were obviously mad at me, but said it was a good idea that I had told them. We handed it over to the authorities, and I remember the police coming to my job, questioning me and my staff. Needless to say, we reviewed the footage of early on that day to see who had left the flash drive there. Police ended up tracing the flash drive back to a student who attended the college. He was 22 years old and was arrested for viewing underage pornography. Turns out, he apparently knew someone who had the ability to get a hold of the files and send it to him. I'm still not sure if they caught the other guy yet, but I really hope they did. When I was 13, I moved with my dad to go live with him in another state as both my parents had gone through a divorce and my mother had then left us. We still don't know where she is. I forget the town we moved to, but what I do remember was the population of our town, which had about a few hundred, and the overall quality of the neighborhoods. All houses were made out of wood, and every house looked to be those houses you'd see when you drove by a bad area. However, the people were nice and overall friendly and seemed to enjoy the new neighbors. Fast forward about a week later, I was eating breakfast at the kitchen table when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it and was greeted to a boy standing there with a smile holding a plate of cookies with his mom. My dad then came and they wanted to give us a warm welcome to the neighborhood. The mom introduced her son as Seth and that they lived around the corner of our street. After meeting Seth, he claimed that he was a little older than me, but seemed like I was still a cool guy to hang out with. Seth seemed cool as well, even though that there was something slightly off about him. We had the same interests and he was really outgoing. With that, they had left and we thanked them for stopping by. I explained to my dad that Seth seemed a bit off as he kind of stared at me in a very uncomfortable way, like he was staring through your soul. My dad seemed happy that I was already starting to make friends and told me that I should hang out with him more often. That night at around 10, I was getting ready for bed to start my new school the next day when I heard something hit my window, most likely a small rock. I opened the blinds to see someone across my street. Whoever it was obviously a male who was wearing all black and a hoodie, and I was almost certain that it was Seth. He gave me a wave and walked back in the direction of his house, and I didn't see him for the rest of the night. Another night, my dad had to work the night shift at his job, which meant that I'd be staying home alone. It was a Friday night, so I didn't have school the next day, so I planned on playing video games while eating leftover pizza throughout the night and figured I'd go to bed when he got home. Fast forward to around 12, I'm watching a movie when I heard a slight tap on my sliding glass door. The curtains were covered, so I couldn't really see as to who or what it was. It was raining heavily outside, but I looked behind the curtains, flipped on the outside light, and looked outside to the left to see who I'm pretty sure was Seth crouched down. He gave me a quick nod and I shut the door to call my dad, who then came home. At this point, Seth was already gone by now, and my dad wasn't going to get involved. We had since moved from that neighborhood, and I never saw him again. When I was 14 years old, I was home alone as both my parents would leave for work at around 3 in the morning. I remember waking up at around 4 in the morning to the sound of my side gate opening and closing and someone walking through the rocks right by my mother's garden. The footsteps grew louder and louder and stopped at the window to my bedroom. Whoever was out there began slightly banging on my window after a few minutes, and they finally stopped for some reason. I was paralyzed with fear and I did not know what to do. I heard them walk around my house and tried opening my back door that leads to our laundry room. At this point, I got pissed because I was an easily tempered kid at the time and wasn't really afraid of anyone. You might as well consider me as one of those people who don't put up with stuff like this. I went and grabbed my pocket knife that I used for the scouts off my nightstand and went back to the door and quickly opened the blinds. The blinds revealed a sketchy looking man, maybe in his early 40s or early 50s. I yelled at him to get the hell out of here or I was gonna call the cops. Eventually, that seemed to work as he ran away while he dropped a large kitchen knife. However, the knife seemed strikingly familiar. It looked like the knife we used all the time to cook. It turns out that it was. I knew now that he had been in our house for God knows how long. I called the cops, and they found the man in my neighbor's backyard. He was a known sex offender in the area and was taken to jail. I will never forget that night. This took place when I was around 23 years old. I recently started working at a gas station in Tallahassee, Florida as my first ever real job. I had to live with my girlfriend in a one small bedroom apartment and we could barely afford rent at the time. My girlfriend worked at a Foot Locker while I worked full time here, making very little amount of money. Whenever I worked, my girlfriend would be home taking care of our dogs, and whatever she worked, I'd be at home. One day, I was working the night shift waiting for our customers to come in for gas or whatever. During the night shift, you normally expect up to 3 or 4 people come in for a candy bar or something as a midnight snack, so the gas station was pretty much empty for the most part. At around 11 p.m., I happened to look out the window when I noticed a man dressed in all black with a hoodie on, just standing around. He wasn't facing me, but rather the opposite, with his hands in his pockets, as if he were waiting for a ride. All of a sudden, he quickly turned around and faced toward me. I looked away to try and not make any eye contact with him, but it was already too late. I could see him walking over to the shop out of the corner of my eye. He then came in and went straight to grab a beer can, and he then came to the register to pay. I told him that its total was $6.50, and he sort of laughed in a calm tone, as if I had told a joke. He said, "Yeah, I'm not paying that much." I told him that I couldn't lower the price and apologized to him. The look he then gave me was a look of anger and hate. All of a sudden, he pulls a gun out from his back pocket and has me at gunpoint. I start yelling for him to not shoot, but he only kept on getting closer to me, yelling for him to give him all the money in the register. By some miracle, a police officer approached the gas station, and the guy then took off down the street. I informed the officer, and he said that he'd be on the lookout. We reviewed the camera footage, but the police failed to find a match to the individual. I'm still thankful for my life, because things could have taken a wrong turn on that night. This is something that I experienced as of recently that made my skin crawl. This happened a few nights ago, and I'm certain that I came in contact with a victim of what I believe to be a killer. I had just gotten home from work at around 11 at night and got ready for bed as I had to get up early the next morning. I am not a morning person when it comes to waking up early every day for work, but I guess that's just how life is. Anyway, as I'm in bed looking forward to a good night's rest, I hear my phone go off. I looked at it and see that it's a call from an unknown number. I've gotten at least 100 of these calls over the past few months, so I figured it was just another scam call pretending to work for the IRS or something, so I ignored it. However, not even a minute later, the same number called again. This time, I got a bit suspicious. I now had my doubts whether it was a scammer. Most scammers wouldn't call back if you didn't answer the phone for the first time. I picked up the phone and let out a sigh and asked who it was. I then began to hear heavy breathing on the other end. I sat bolt upright on my bed and asked who it was once again. A chill ran down my spine when I began to hear the cries and wheezing of a girl. I frantically asked if she was okay and if she needed help, but all she responded with was crying as if she had been harmed. I happened to know a police officer from down the street who could possibly help me in a situation like this. I said that I was going to call the cops, and this time, she responded with 5 words that still haunt me till this day. "He's coming. Please help me." Not even 10 seconds later, I heard her scream and the phone then hung up. All I could hear now was silence, but I still reported the number to the police. As far as I know, they're still looking for the location of the number, but no news has come to me about it. Till this day, I'm convinced that this girl was kidnapped. I'm still unsure if she's alive or not, but I like to think that she was found safely and is now living happily with her family. Before I begin with my story, I'd like to state a few things. Before this had happened, both my parents had unfortunately died due to a major car accident about 2 months before this caused by a drunk driver. I was 20 at the time and had to work to pay rent for my apartment, so I was stuck financially with depression as well. In other words, I was pretty much on my own at this point in my life. Anyways, on with the story. In 2017, I worked as a cashier at a nearby McDonald's in my hometown in Scottsdale, Arizona. Scottsdale was a very nice city in Arizona. The people were nice and friendly and the weather was okay. Some days would be hot while others would be both hot and cold. The McDonald's I had began working at was near the suburbs of Scottsdale, which just so happened to be in walking distance from my apartment. I drove to work once in a while if I didn't have a lot of time, but I figured why waste money and gas to go somewhere 10 minutes away when I could just walk. Anyway, my shifts would constantly change from afternoons to sometimes night. The day shifts were okay, but actually somewhat enjoyed the night shift, mainly because it was mostly quiet, and you maybe have about 5 or 6 customers come in for some fries once it was very late. There was this one incident where I experienced something that would stick with me for a very, very long time. It was a Friday night in the middle of the summer, and I was working the night shift at work. The night shift would normally be from 9 to 3 in the morning. Yes, the McDonald's I worked at was open 24 hours. Not many like that in Scottsdale, but they exist. Anyway, it was me and one of my other coworkers getting things set up for dinner service. Refilling sauces, frying french fries, etc. During this time, we normally have around 10 to 15 customers come in, but as it got more late, less people would start to show up. Fast forward to around 12. I was scrolling through Instagram by the register as there were no other customers for me to serve. All of a sudden, I hear the front door open and was greeted to a man in front of the register. Politely, I asked if I could take his order. He responded in a very low, deep tone saying, "Just get me a bottle of water." I don't know what it was, but there was something slightly off-putting about him. To give a bit of a description as to how he looked, he wore a pair of old stained ripped jeans and was also wearing a very dirty shirt and jacket. I told him that his total was $106 and he pulled out a $5 bill and handed it to me, making sure our hands touched. He said in the same voice, "Thanks, cutie, I'll be leaving now. You could keep the change." I could smell the cigarettes in his breath, and he then gave me a very creepy-looking grin that sent a shiver down my spine. He then thankfully left and disappeared into the night. I was officially creeped out at this point and went to go tell my coworker about what had happened. You'd often get a few creeps during the night shift, but I never encountered someone this creepy. The way he was dressed and the vibes he gave off and the cigarettes in his breath really freaked me out. I'd also like to mention that the McDonald's was located in an area which had a history of small crimes like break-ins and stuff like that. Anyway, fast forward to about 1 o'clock, the place was pretty much empty for the most part. It was just me and the other worker. The other worker had told me to go take out the trash and replace the bags. I hated taking out the trash, not because of the trash itself, but rather the night. It sounds childish, but ever since my childhood, I'd always have a fear of the dark, and for whatever reason, it stuck with me. I'm walking out of the McDonald's, heading toward the dumpster when I stopped dead in my tracks. Crouched down behind the dumpster was the same man from before, obviously waiting for me. By some miracle, he didn't see me, and I slowly stepped back and went inside. I told the other worker that I was calling the cops, and I did just that while explaining the situation to the operator. A cop car came within 5 minutes and of course arrested the guy still behind the dumpster. The man gave me a look I still can't describe. It was the look of hate, anger, and revenge, like the first thing he would do once he got out of jail would be to come back for me. However, the police said that they had found drugs, mostly GHB, which is a powder to put someone to sleep, which are mainly used to spike people's drinks. They had also found rope, duct tape, obviously stolen wallets and credit cards. Whoever this guy was planning on robbing me out of my money. Who knows what would have happened to me had I not seen him hiding behind that dumpster. My dad told me the story that happened to him when he was a child, and this story is why my dad always keeps the doors locked. His parents, aka my grandparents, had recently just gotten over a divorce over problems that I won't go into. My dad ended up living with his mom, and his dad had anger issues and drank a lot, which is why he did not live with him. Him and his mom bought a small 2-bedroom house for the two of them. His mom worked for most of the day while he'd be at school, which meant that he'd also be home alone for most of the time until his mother got home from work. One day, his mom had to work late one night, so my dad would be having the house to himself for a while. From what he told me, he went upstairs to do homework and watch some TV. When he went back downstairs to the kitchen to make some food, he saw a man crouched down by the food pantry holding what looked like a crowbar. He described the man to have long greasy hair, a plaid t-shirt, and some stained jeans. However, he didn't seem to acknowledge the fact that my dad was there, as the man was facing in the opposite direction. My dad was a brave kid back then, so he quietly walked back up the stairs, not looking back, to get to the home phone from his mom's room. He spoke quietly into the phone to the police that a man he didn't know was in his house and that he needed help. They happened to live near a police station that was relatively close by, so the police showed up in a matter of minutes. However, by the time they arrived, the man was already gone, and it was very hard to trace someone back in the day, so they unfortunately never found him. Till this day, my dad is still sensitive about the whole thing, and he tends to get upset when my mom forgets to leave the doors or windows unlocked.